Picture two people on a first date. The conversation flows. There is chemistry, real, undeniable electric chemistry. By the end of the evening, they both know something is here. Fast forward 6 months. They are living together. They know each other's schedules, each other's habits, each other's bodies. From the outside, they are a couple, a real, functioning, committed couple. But here's the question nobody in this scenario ever thinks to ask. Do they actually know each other? Not what time the other person wakes up, not what they order at their favorite restaurant, not even what their body looks like in the morning light. Do they know what the other person is most afraid of? What they secretly believe about themselves? What they have never told anyone because they are not entirely sure they are allowed to? In most relationships, the answer, if anyone is honest, is no. And that gap between physical closeness and genuine emotional knowing is what this episode is about. There is a hierarchy of intimacy that most people intuitively sense but almost never fully articulate. At the bottom of that hierarchy, physical closeness, the sharing of space, the sharing of a body, proximity and touch. This level of intimacy is real. It matters, but it is, in the architecture of human connection, the easiest to achieve, the least guarded, the most automatic. At the top of that hierarchy, separated from physical intimacy by something that might as well be a canyon, is emotional intimacy. The genuine, mutual, undefended sharing of inner worlds. The experience of being known, not just desired, not just comfortable, not just loved, but actually, specifically, precisely known. Here is the thing almost nobody says out loud. Most people never get there. Not because they don't want to, not because they don't try, but because getting to genuine emotional intimacy requires navigating something that the human nervous system has spent millions of years evolving to protect us from. Vulnerability. Real, full, nothing to hide behind vulnerability. And today on The Connection Theory, we are going to understand exactly why that is so hard and what it actually takes to get to the other side. I'm Dr. Alex Morgan, and this conversation is going to change how you understand intimacy forever. Think about the last time you felt genuinely close to someone. Not physically close, emotionally close. The kind of close where you finished a conversation and actually felt in your body that this person sees me. This person knows something about me that is real. When did that last happen? With your partner? A friend? How long ago? If you have to reach back further than you'd like, you are not alone. Here is the psychological truth that most people spend their entire adult lives not quite understanding. Physical intimacy and emotional intimacy are not on the same spectrum. They are not 2 degrees of the same thing. They are built by completely different mechanisms, involve completely different parts of the nervous system, and produce completely different experiences. Physical intimacy is driven primarily by the reward system, by dopamine, by oxytocin, by the neurochemistry of desire and pleasure, and the biological pull toward another body. It is, in the most fundamental sense, automatic. The body knows what it wants, and when the conditions are right, attraction, opportunity, consent, the body moves toward it without requiring a great deal of deliberate decision-making. Emotional intimacy is driven by something entirely different. Psychologist Brené Brown at the University of Houston, after a decade of research on human connection and vulnerability, described emotional intimacy as the product of courage under uncertainty. Not chemistry, not attraction, not comfort, courage. The specific, difficult, deeply uncomfortable courage of saying something true about yourself to another person before you know how they will respond, before you know if it is safe, before you know if what you share will be held with care or used against you. Think about that for a second. Physical intimacy asks, do I find this person attractive? Is there chemistry? Is this moment right? Emotional intimacy asks, am I willing to be wrong about this person? Am I willing to show them something about me that could be rejected? Am I willing to be uncertain in front of them about who I am? Those are completely different questions, and the second set is significantly harder to answer yes to. But here's the strange part. The reason most people conflate the two, the reason they mistake physical closeness for emotional intimacy, is not naivety. It is protection. It is the nervous system's elegant, unconscious solution to a problem it has been managing since childhood. If I can get the feeling of closeness without the risk of actual knowing, if I can be near someone without being seen by them, I get some of what I need without any of the danger. And that solution, intelligent as it is exactly what keeps most people from ever building the kind of intimacy they actually want. Almost nobody realizes this, but the experience of emotional vulnerability, of genuinely revealing your inner world to another person, activates the same neural circuits as physical threat. Let that land for a second. When you are about to say something truly honest to someone you care about, something that could be rejected, something that reveals a fear or a need or an uncertainty you have been carefully managing, your amygdala fires. The same structure that processes physical danger. The same system that tells you to run from a predator. Your body does not distinguish between a lion and a conversation that might not go well. Neuroscientist Lisa Feldman Barrett at Northeastern University, whose research has fundamentally reshaped how we understand emotion and perception, describes this as interoceptive prediction, the brain's constant modeling of what threats, physical or social, might be coming next. And here is what the brain has learned through evolutionary history. Social rejection is not just uncomfortable, it is dangerous. For most of human history, being rejected by your social group, being seen as unworthy, unacceptable, not enough, meant something close to death. Isolation from the group was not a metaphorical threat, it was a survival threat. So the brain built a system to protect against it. A system that monitors social environments for signs of potential rejection, and that activates a threat response when the conditions for rejection seem to be present. And what are the conditions for rejection? Exposure, revelation, the showing of something real about yourself to someone who might not like it. In other words, emotional intimacy. The brain, your brain, everyone's brain, is specifically neurologically, evolutionarily wired to make emotional intimacy feel dangerous. Think about your own relationship. Have you ever had something true, something real, rise up inside you during a conversation with your partner? Something you genuinely wanted to say and felt something stop you? A tightening in the chest? A decision made in half a second to say something else instead? That was not weakness. That was not emotional immaturity. That was your amygdala doing exactly what it was designed to do, protecting you from the perceived threat of social exposure. But here's what makes this complicated. The threat response was designed for a social world where most people genuinely were untrustworthy, where revealing weakness to the wrong person had real consequences. But you are not living in that social world. You are in a relationship with a person who has chosen you, who shows up for you, who, in all likelihood, wants to know you. The threat system is firing at a threat that no longer exists in the form it was designed to address. And understanding that, really feeling that, is the first step toward choosing differently. Here is a question that might be uncomfortable. How emotionally intimate were the people who raised you? Not with you specifically, with each other, with themselves. Did you grow up around adults who said things that were true, who admitted when they were scared, who let themselves be seen in the full, complicated, uncertain reality of their inner life? Or did you grow up around people who managed, who performed competence, who kept the difficult things inside? Who showed you, by example, that the appropriate response to emotional vulnerability is to find a way to contain it. Because here is what the research, decades of attachment research, tells us with extraordinary consistency. The level of emotional intimacy you allow yourself in adult relationships is largely determined by the emotional intimacy you witnessed and experienced as a child, not as a limitation, as a template. Dr. Mary Main at Berkeley, building on John Bowlby's foundational work, developed what is called the Adult Attachment Interview, a psychological assessment that measures how freely and coherently an adult can discuss their own emotional history. And what she found is remarkable. The adults who could build the deepest emotional intimacy in their relationships were not the adults who had the happiest childhoods. They were not the adults who had been spared difficulty or pain. They were the adults who had developed what she called narrative coherence, the ability to tell the story of their own inner life clearly, honestly, and without excessive defense. In plain terms, the people who could be emotionally intimate with others were the people who had learned to be emotionally honest with themselves. Think about your own relationship. How honest are you with yourself about what you feel? Not what you think you should feel, not what makes sense, what you actually, genuinely, in the quiet of your own mind, feel. Because emotional intimacy with another person requires, as its prerequisite, emotional intimacy with yourself. You cannot share what you have not yet allowed yourself to see. But here's the strange part. Most people, even very self-aware people, have significant blind spots in their own emotional landscape. Feelings they have learned to translate into something more acceptable. Needs they have learned to reframe as preferences. Fears they have learned to present as practical concerns. And those blind spots, those layers of unconscious self-management, are exactly what prevent genuine emotional intimacy from being built. You cannot be known if you are editing yourself. And most people are editing constantly, so automatically, so fluently, that they no longer even notice they are doing it. What if I told you that most of what people call intimacy in their relationships is actually something else entirely? Here are the 4 most common substitutes for emotional intimacy and why each of them, despite feeling like connection, leaves the deeper hunger unsatisfied. The first is logistical closeness. 2 people who feel emotionally distant from each other compensate by becoming extraordinarily close in logistics. They know each other's schedules intimately. They coordinate their lives with impressive efficiency. They make plans, manage the household, handle the finances, raise the children, together in perfect synchrony. And they mistake this operational closeness for emotional intimacy. But logistics is not intimacy. Coordination is not connection. 2 people can run a household together with flawless efficiency while remaining complete strangers to each other's inner world. The question is not, do we function well together? The question is, do I actually know this person? The second substitute is shared history. Couples who have been together for years often point to their shared history as evidence of emotional intimacy. We've been through so much together. We've seen each other at our worst. We know each other. But shared experience is not the same as shared inner life. You can survive a crisis with someone without ever discussing what it felt like from the inside. You can weather difficulty together while each of you weathers it in private. Shared history creates a real bond, but it is not the same as the bond that comes from genuinely, deliberately, vulnerably sharing your inner experience of that history with another person. The third substitute is physical closeness used as an emotional proxy. Almost nobody realizes how often physical intimacy is being used unconsciously, automatically, as a substitute for the emotional intimacy that feels too dangerous to pursue directly. The body is sent in place of the self. Physical closeness is offered when what is actually needed and what actually cannot be risked is the kind of closeness that requires words, that requires admission, that requires someone to say, this is who I actually am, and I need you to receive it. The physical version of that is safer, more immediate, more certain in its outcome. And so 2 people get very physically close while remaining in the ways that actually satisfy the deepest hunger very far apart. The fourth substitute is emotional performance. Many people have become extremely good at performing emotional intimacy. They use the language of vulnerability, they share the right kinds of stories, they ask the right questions, they create the appearance of openness. But there is a crucial difference between performing vulnerability and actually being vulnerable. And most people, most of the time, are doing the former. Performed vulnerability is curated. It involves sharing difficulties that have already been processed, things that are no longer raw, no longer uncertain, no longer actually risky to reveal. It is the story of the hard thing, not the hard thing itself. Genuine vulnerability is messy. It involves sharing something in the middle of being uncertain about it, something whose outcome, in terms of how it will be received, you genuinely do not know. That is the vulnerability that builds real emotional intimacy. And it is the one that most people spend their lives finding creative ways to avoid. Here is a paradox of our current moment. We live in the most emotionally aware culture in American history. Therapy is mainstream. Vulnerability is celebrated on podcasts and TikToks and Instagram captions. The language of emotional intelligence is everywhere. And yet, the rates of emotional disconnection in romantic relationships are at a record high. The reported experience of feeling truly known by a romantic partner is declining. And loneliness, including the relational loneliness that exists inside committed partnerships, is being called a public health epidemic. How is it possible that we are talking more about emotional intimacy than ever and experiencing less of it? The answer is uncomfortable, but it is important. We have learned to perform emotional intelligence without actually practicing emotional intimacy. Social media taught us the aesthetics of vulnerability. We know how a vulnerable post looks. We know the language, we know the format. We have seen it modeled 1,000 times. The personal revelation that lands well, that gets the response that says, "I see you, I respect your openness, you are brave for sharing this." But the vulnerability that gets social media engagement is not the vulnerability that builds emotional intimacy. Because social media vulnerability is curated. It is edited. It is shared with an audience, which means it is, by definition, a performance. The real thing, the raw, unfiltered, genuinely uncertain thing is not posted. It is whispered at 11 at night to one person. It is said out loud when you are not sure it is the right thing to say. It is offered without knowing whether it will be received with care or dismissed. Think about your own relationship. How much of the emotional sharing that happens between you and your partner is genuinely raw? And how much of it has already been processed, made safe, made presentable, made ready for sharing? There is another modern obstacle. We have more ways to regulate emotional discomfort than at any point in human history. Scroll, watch, listen, order. Any feeling that threatens to become too large, too uncertain, too uncomfortable, there is a technology standing by to soften it before it demands to be sat with. And the problem with that is this. Emotional intimacy is built in the moments when emotional discomfort is not regulated away. It is built in the moments when something rises up, something raw, something real, something uncertain, and instead of reaching for the phone, you reach for your partner. Every time you reach for the phone instead. Every time you smooth the rough edge of a feeling before it can ask you to share it, you choose distance. Not consciously, not deliberately, but functionally. And the intimacy that you want, the kind that makes a relationship feel genuinely alive, becomes, in those moments, a little less possible. What if the reason emotional intimacy feels so hard is not because you are bad at it, but because you have been trying to build it with the wrong tools? Here is what genuine emotional intimacy actually requires. Not the performance of it, the reality. It requires what I call asymmetric vulnerability. The willingness to be the first person to go deeper, to say the true thing before you know if it is safe, to offer something real before the other person has demonstrated that they will receive it with care. This is the part that almost everyone is waiting for the other person to do first. Both partners sit in the relationship, each waiting for the other to create the safety that will allow them to be vulnerable, each withholding the vulnerability that would create the safety the other person is waiting for, each protecting themselves from a risk that would, if taken, dissolve the very thing they are both protecting themselves from. It is a perfect, tragic, entirely reversible stalemate, and it is broken by one thing only. Someone going first. Not because it is safe, not because the outcome is guaranteed, not because the other person has already demonstrated that they will hold what is offered with the care it deserves, but because the alternative, staying in the stalemate, maintaining the managed distance, living in the relationship that functions but never quite connects, is worse than the risk. Think about your own relationship. Is there something true, something real, something you have been holding that you have not shared? Not because you don't want to, but because you haven't been sure it would land safely. That thing, whatever it is, that is where the emotional intimacy you've been wanting actually lives. Not in the processed version, not in the story you've already told 100 times. In the thing that still feels uncertain when you think about saying it out loud. Say it tonight. Not perfectly. Not when the moment is exactly right. Not after you figured out exactly how to phrase it. Just say it. To the person who chose you, who is still, if you let them be, the safest place available to you. Because emotional intimacy is not built in the grand moments of revelation. It is built in the accumulation of small, imperfect, genuinely honest ones. And every time you choose to say the true thing, every time you resist the reflex to edit and manage and present the safe version, you lay one more brick in the foundation of the thing you actually want. A relationship where two people actually know each other. Not what they order at their favorite restaurant, not what time they wake up, not even what their body looks like in the morning light. Who they actually are, in the private, uncertain, most essentially themselves version of their experience. That is what emotional intimacy is. And it has been possible in your relationship with your partner all along. You have been in relationships your whole life. You have been physically close to people. You have shared homes and beds and years and histories with people who matter to you. And if you are honest, if you are willing to sit with the question for just a moment, you may find that the number of people who have actually known you is smaller than the number of people you have loved. That gap is not a failure. It is not evidence that you are broken or bad at connection or somehow less capable of intimacy than other people. It is evidence of the very thing we spent this episode exploring. The very human, very understandable, very neurologically precise difficulty of allowing yourself to be fully seen. The difficulty has a reason. The reason has a psychology. The psychology has a path through it. And the path starts with one choice. The choice to say something true tonight. To the person who is already there, who already chose you, who is already, whether you have let yourself fully believe it yet, safe enough. You don't have to be ready. You just have to begin. I'm Dr. Alex Morgan. This has been The Connection Theory. If this episode reached something in you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more psychology of love, intimacy, and human connection. And I'll see you in the next one.